Hey everyone, I am Maddie Jackson, podcast host and founder of The Trees Have Eyes. If you or a loved one is a victim of human trafficking, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888 or text the word info or help to Be Free 233-733. Thank you so much. Hey, this is Scottish Girl coming at you with a podcast called iHeartRadio's oh my god, am I serious? Hey, this is Scottish Girl on Instagram coming at you with a podcast called The Trees Have Eyes on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Spreaker.com. How are you guys doing? I wanted to make a podcast for you guys, and it's on this weird subject. It's about slavery and how slavery was back in the day when they used to breed slaves. And so, yes, I was trying to make this for you guys because I think it's important to talk about it. How they used to breed slaves, and it was very dark times then when they used to do this to slaves. And they basically used to take these people called fancy girls or fancy maids, and they would it was like a woman that was African, and they would sell her for the purpose of sex. And they would sell her for the purpose of procreating more babies. And this was because there was this time period when they couldn't have more slaves. They couldn't have more slaves, so they had to procreate for more slaves that were dying and were getting older. And this was in 1808 when Congress ended the nation's participation in the international slave trade. So they would basically just they would just make sure that there was more babies being born. And they didn't treat the woman very right. They didn't treat the men very right. They forced people to have sex with people. And this was just the worst, darkest time ever in the United States because, first of all, it was wrong how they would do that. That was just wrong. They match-made people to purposely for the forcage of sex, to forcibly, not even maritally mate people, but it was more like they'd find mates for people to have sex with other people. And it was for the purpose of impregnating the slave. And it was wrong. It was wrong how they treated slaves. And actually, when you look at the whole picture, we are not the minority. Blacks are the majority of the population. And when you look at our whole history of slavery and slaves and master and slave and everything, we are actually not even a race. We're considered all races, different DNAs of different types of races. We're not just one race. There's no black and there's no white. There's no black, there's no white. And that should kind of ease off the idea of racism and what racism is. And so, yeah, it's just incredibly crazy. It's crazy how they used to treat slaves. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. For how they used to purposely enforce sex on people for the purpose of rape, incest, to make more children, more offspring, more slaves. And it's definitely wrong. It says here in Good Breeders, The History of American Slavery on slates. .com, a momentary rupture in the fabric of things. So this was written August 24th, 2015. They're talking about this. Okay, so they forced sexual relationships among slaves. They wanted to improve their stock of slaves. So it was like their stock was human beings being sold. And so this kind of does remind me of human trafficking a lot. It reminds me of slavery, labor trafficking. It reminds me of like modern slavery as far as like sex trade. It reminds me of like how I feel sometimes where I can't have control over my own life path situations. It's like I'm a slave myself. It's like I'm living life of like a person that is, I don't know, like an example of a slave, like how slaves used to live. They used to have passes to go out and see other people and go to stores and go where they wanted to go. They couldn't leave by themselves, but they have to have a pass with them. So so it was just sickly how odd and strange it was for, somebody to buy and sell women and men, but mostly just try and procreate more. And so they often thought that the fancy maids were of more value to them because they could produce offspring and they could like sell them off to other people, the babies after they were raised. They could sell them into slaves. Even there was child slavery. So it was between the ages of 13, I think, to 20 something when this took place, where they would just like basically force a woman to have sex with someone. And they had to have more and more babies, and freedom was promised to those who could produce as much as 15 slave children. Crazy. It's crazy how our history of the United States of America is based on this. It's based on slave breeding and making sure that slaves would do stuff like this. They were called sex farms, and this is why they would breed so many slaves. And so weird because we're all human beings. We're all human beings. You can't just think that a white person's the majority when everybody's the majority, and we're all in this together as a team. And our history comes from all this racism and treating people unfairly. Our roots come from labor trafficking. Our roots come from human trafficking and sex trafficking. This all comes back to that. And so I look at people's comments on what they thought about this. And it says what people say about this. And they try to tell us we are violent criminals, thieves, everything they call us. They're talking about themselves. Use the Bible to justify holding our relatives in slavery. Someone else said, sick, they force slaves to have orgies. This is not human nature. When will the world release this? and address it. Sick and filthy that we can love truly. There's no optimism with this. It's like, it helps us understand history, but we don't understand like why this would happen in our DNA to us and stuff. So, well, I am of mixed opinion about these stories. The fact is that they did whatever they wanted to do with blacks. I mean, we have to know that doing whatever with people covers a lot of ground sexually without going into detail. I remember I was reading this article on how this doctor was a figure in New York City. He used to like do studies on slaves for the purpose of gynecology to basically do tests on women slaves because he wanted to help his gynecology, his degree, and his him being a doctor, and what he does, he wanted his medical practice. So like he wanted to make sure that there was like studies on slaves, and he didn't use anesthesia on them when he did these procedures. He took out their organs without permission. He told them what to do, how to be. He didn't let them have rights, so they were just used as tools to gain some type of like power, social power over their bodies, to make sure that gynecology is how it is today. And they used to study it on slaves. Have you seen rabbit-proof fence and what they do to the Australians? It gets worse, much worse. You can't tell me that some of the terror and carnage mixed with incest and all did not affect our DNA gene pool in some way. You could have been forced to have sex with your sister, mother, own child, even just to keep the numbers going. 400 plus years of this. Mondo Price, thank God. The stories I've been hearing have been so sickening. I question their humanity as a race. The ancestors still live inside of us, and their pain echoes in my heart. I will no longer fear their beast nature. My life's passion will be to destroy it. The world doesn't care. Why should the world care when we act as if we don't care to know collectively? Most of us are too busy turning up or burying our heads in the sand, aka church, and ignore what's really going on. I read this and I'm literally sick to my stomach. I can't believe to describe my anger. These people will read an article and then immediately imply deflection tactics. It's the same thing they did to American Indians. Who welcomed them in the Caribbean and the Americas? They enslaved them, stole all their gold, took away their land, raped their women, all kinds of atrocities they did to them. And one reason why I strongly disagree with couples dating, marriage, or anything like that, I just can't understand how, why, after they did everything they wanted to do with us and to us as a people, why would we freely give ourselves to them? And this is talking about whites. But whites in general are not at fault. It's just our history of what we experienced in those days, you know. It's not our fault that our genetics are bad, you know. We need to communicate and get a signature petition going for reparations and support national organizations that support reparations. Says, okay, let's say I dropped $5 million into your hands from reparations. What's the first thing you're going to do with it? The second, third, and so on. The average person has no clue what to do with that kind of money. They will wind up just giving it right back to the government and European buying dumb stuff. Hell, a lot of us can't manage food stamps. My point is education should be priority over money. Money is what got us into this hellhole. Why do we want a bunch of it just to end up becoming like them? Yes, it says Race Baiter says, I don't believe that there is a genetic issue with black people at all either. People have to be careful and selective with what they choose to read, and secondly, how they process, analyze, and retain that information. Research suggests that the opposite of black people. A large part of the problem is that black children and youth live in systemic poverty, and therefore they are not able to maximize their true potential. It's done by design. If there was forced incest at this rate that is suggested, and this suggestion is a dangerous one, wouldn't that affect the slaves' overall and mental capacity to actually work the land? It kind of would. It would affect their overall self, and that is how it was. They were forcing these people to do things under their no control of their own, and they forced them to continue on their days with all this horrible horror of what they were doing to these people. And it was very wrong how they treated these people. And the list goes on and on to how many comments there were about people who disagreed with it. There was a lot of disagreements. A lot of people, obviously, that would disagree. Why would anybody agree with that? You know, it's like, I absolutely don't agree with any of it. It's terrible how they would treat people back in the day when it comes to slavery. It was the most hideous thing in mankind. And it's pretty much why we have contraceptives in the communities that we live in. And it's because we have, you know, sometimes we don't have rights to contraceptives, or we don't have access to contraceptives. And it's wrong how there's so much power with people that have more insurance and more money, and they can obtain proper contraception and contraceptives. They can, I don't know, it's why we have abortions now in our communities, and it's why it comes from our history and everything. So, yeah, there's this article right here. It says, Slavery in the U.S., How Black Women Resisted Slave Breeding by Using Cotton Roots as Contraceptives. So, it says, after 1808, slave labor was a scarce commodity in the United States. And the stock traded were humans whose lives were as perishable as autumn leaves. These slavepreneurs did what every good businessman would do. They found an alternative means of supply, slave breeding. Slave breeding was a slave multiplication agenda. So let's say there's 100 slaves that they buy. Well, now there's going to be 100,000 slaves because of this procreation. So they're just having babies, and they can't stop having babies because they're forced to have babies. They encouraged this procreation by favoring the female slaves who had more children. In some cases, freedom was promised to those who could produce as much as 15 slave children. Slave girls were expected to start reproducing from the age of 13 to the age of 20. They could have had at least 5 children by the age of 20. And a good example is the testimony of Maggie Stenhouse, an ex-slave. In her words, during slavery, there were stockmen they was weighed and tested, and man would rent the stockman and put him in a room with some young woman he wanted to raise children from. So they would also look at the slaves. They would look at the way that they looked and appeared, and they would try to mate them with other people to make them into certain slaves. And they would see what kind of class that slave would be in. Margie's testimony expressly showed how slave owners were uncompromisingly meticulous about slave breeding. They carefully paired which slave mates with which. Like livestock, these slave breeders knew the role of biology in producing the healthiest stock. Like good farmers fortuned with fertile ground, the slave owners knew to select the best stock of seeds to plant. It's like when you choose animals for food. The cheap labor they provided in plantations wasn't cheap anymore. Enslaved children sold like wildfire. Accordingly, these women perfected the science of contraception with the use of herbs to prevent or terminate pregnancies. They spread the popular conspiracy amongst themselves that chewing on cotton roots wipes the womb clean of any germinating life. Scientists found that the cotton plant contains a poisonous pigment known as gossypol. It is believed that this substance has the ability to restrict the mobility of sperm and also the menstrual cycle by preventing the secretion of certain hormones. Chewing cotton roots as a contraceptive or to induce abortion was common among slave women that labored in cotton fields. Other less popular abortifacient included the peacock flower. Women who couldn't lay hold of the cotton roots made use of the peacock flower to achieve the same aim of frustrating the idea of slave breeding. So these were very smart, beautiful, talented people. These people knew exactly what they were doing. They were not animals, I mean, the way that they treated these individuals did not define them. They were ultimately human beings, mistreated, and it was wrong. The resistance proved so effective against the agenda and reproduction of slaves that it shifted power from the hands of the slaver to the enslaved. So now these people that were enslaved are getting their own rights as far as it goes with their slavery is almost ending because they have rights because they are knocking out the idea of slavery, and they're putting in place that contraception is much more deeper in effect to get rid of slavery. But I have an issue with contraception sometimes. I don't agree in abortion. That's the only thing I don't agree with. I believe it's good to prevent pregnancy. I believe it's easy to not have sex with someone. But I also believe that in adulthood, if you are married or not married, it is common to have sex. But it is also common for your DNA to be in your brain when it comes to sex. And I feel that so many people identify with this thing called sex, and people have sex all the time, but it's wrong how birth control is used sometimes, like abortion or to kill babies, or the wrong way of using abortion, kill the baby after they're born, or to just after a certain amount of months in the womb, kill the baby. That's wrong. There has to be a certain type of limit to contraceptives and how to use them and to not have abortions, to use it in a different way that helps somebody not get into a situation like that. Especially through COVID-19. And there's so many lost lives from COVID-19. They realized that through contraception, they could control the amount of profit that slavers made off their bodies. They were not powerless after all. I get to this big point over here. It says, secondly, the idea of parta sequitur ventrum, I can't pronounce that, saw its natural end. Parta sequitur ventrum is the idea that a child inherits the status of its mother. The implication is that any child born to a slave woman would equally become a slave and a property of the slaver. The contraceptive resistance to slave breeding by these women ensured that more children were not condemned to a life of slavery. They lived their life in a better situation. They weren't slaves. So fighting for your rights in general does make the world a better place, you know? What didn't seem simple was that while some women irrigated the cotton fields with the blood of voluntary miscarriages, these were voluntary miscarriages. So, yeah. Kind of like abortion, but not really. It was mostly like abortion. It was like abortion to have a voluntary miscarriage because you're forcing yourself to have the miscarriage. Others loved their children to infanticide. They fed them death with the arms of love, just to starve the slavers' whip of pleasure. Because no child deserves not to have a life of its own. It's so sad. It's so sad how they lost so many lives of their own children because they couldn't just let themselves have children when naturally, like they wanted to have it, which had to do with consent, proper consent, being able to want to have sex when they wanted to, be able to control themselves when they wanted to. A lot of these sexual slavery, sexual farms were about sex addiction and being able to manipulate people into having sex too much or having sex not enough or have sex like a crazy person, a lion in a cage, you know, have sex in a way that's immoral because they were trying to breed these slaves. And it's wrong how children had to die from abortion because of slave owners working towards hurting the slaves and hurting the slaves' children. They wanted to end slavery, and that is how it ended, was with them being on contraceptives. I have a few topics to talk about. Well, first of all, the topic can be sex. The other one is infertility and DNA. Sex, to me, is something that's like a bond between two people. It's something that is a serious topic to talk about that is kind of gross to talk about. We don't usually talk about sex naturally, like, everybody talks about sex, but it's like, in a way, sex is kind of like a privacy. It's what you do in your privacy of your own closed window. You don't just let it all out and just say, I want to have sex with these people, or I'm going to force you to have sex with somebody else, or something like that. Sex is based on reproduction, but it's also based on real trust, real love, real friendships. When you have a friendship, you have love, and then you can have love to romantic love, and you can have love to intimate love, and that can be holding hands to sex. You know, sex is the last resort in any type of orgy or communication. Communication's a better word, because it's like any type of communication of love should not be sex. It should not be filled with hostility of sex. Okay? Infertility is a good topic to talk about, because infertility damages women's organs, as far as our men's organs, as far as like being able to be fertile. And so some of these contraceptives don't actually help people stay fertile for a long time. They actually lose their fertility. So, there's this argument about contraception that is kind of crazy. It's like sometimes I think that when it comes to this whole slave idea of like them breeding slaves, like a communism, an unwanted communism and stuff. So I gotta read you this extra thing. It says the term slave farming and slavepreneur, as used in this article, as the writers made up words to bring the description of slave breeding as close to what it was as possible. So like when they say entrepreneur, I'm making money off of this, they were slave farming. They were forcing men and women to have sex. It changed our DNA as a whole. It changed our DNA to who we are today. And like I said, blacks are not the minority. There's no darker people or Mexican or Hispanic or whites versus blacks or, people who are minority versus majority. That's a total lie. Another topic to talk about, staying single. My opinion on this is very real. It's very real. Wow, I don't even know how to say it. I feel like with my parents having guardianship, I feel like this want or need to understand my life so much that I would be willing to figure things out and make unclever actions to my life's problems. And I would not be as single as I would think single would be, because even though I did say to somebody in their car that I would love for you to just kill me, I'm not going to be your prostitute, I don't want to have sex. Well, obviously prostitution isn't consensual. It's not consensual. It's not like somebody honestly wants to prostitute themselves. But this type of thing is forcing me into some type of thing called prostitution. And I'm not a prostitute under my whole heart is not a prostitute. I don't want to be a prostitute. In fact, I'm more of a virgin than a prostitute. I would be asexual, but it doesn't stand up for people's rights. It doesn't stand up for anybody's rights to call yourself asexual, because that's unbalanced. It makes you think that you're like the asexual person who's not a human being, yet you're a human being. But human beings do have sex. Human beings have sex and they have lives. And they live like a human being. It's not abnormal. Since childhood, it was abnormal for me to express the idea of sex. But, It's not abnormal to have sex, or to, in fact, it's more logical to think everybody has sex. It's something that everybody does. And I would love to figure out my life's personal circumstances by understanding why I do the things that I do, because it does happen for some good reason. I believe that. Because everything happens for the purpose of its own, to happen to help me in some way in my life, the way it's been. And if I become sensitive to something, if I feel like I need to do something extra that's kind of ridiculous, it doesn't make sense, I'm going to do it because it's just something that I have to do. It's something that I have to do to get to that next step of my life, to get to a better part of my life that can get me back to understanding my rights as an adult. And here's another topic that I'm going to talk about. Talk about rape stigma. Why is it more common for blacks, to have more procreation? Well, we already know what's going on with that. Usually in poor communities, it's more common for people to have more babies. And that might not be true, but it also may be true. Probably because of our DNA and how slavery treated slaves. But also, it has to do with our infertility or fertility. It has to do with a lot of things like that. It has to do with how we were raised, and how we were raised understanding that term, sex. And rape is very horrible, and there's this rape culture, and that men are better than women, or that men are more powerful than women. It's kind of like a sexist thing, that men have it better than women, or men should have it better than women, and that's not really true. Men should be equal to women. And then, I just feel that it's better for me to think like the norm, to think like the average when it comes to thinking like what I've been through in life and how to handle my situation. I can't just play that everything's all right when things are not as right as I want them to be. I can't just lie to people and say, well, this isn't going to happen to me in real life, is it? I could actually go get killed. That could happen to me. I'm not saying that I really do want to get killed, or I really do want to have sex with strangers. I'm just saying that's not something that I really want at all. But since my life has been so different from other 30-year-old women, I feel like I have every right to say, hoes for world peace. To say something about it's okay to embrace what's going on with me, what's going on with my life right now, and how it could be. But ultimately, this is how I believe my life is, and how I look at myself regardless of what I do with my body. I say this: my body is a heart of Saint Mary. No human trafficking, no abortion zone. And I stand with my life with that. I don't let anybody knock that down. It's very important that I stand up for my rights as a human being, adult, grown woman. That I stand up for my rights as a woman, and I go through the experiences that women have. I don't just live my life all shut down. I can't do this, I can't do that. I'm restrained. I have no access to resources. I can't go get married. I can't have sex to have a baby. Babies don't exist for me. Because I'm going to have no money the rest of my life if I don't do something about this now and say something. This is really what's happening. This is really what's going on my internet. This is really what happens to me. You know? So, it has to do with no freedom for life, no right to live life, no right to life. And it starts with parenthood. It starts with being able to have your own freedoms as a child, being able to have your own rights. Because it says here, because no child deserves not to have a life of its own. You can choose your own way as an adult to live your life the way you want to live it. And I feel like that guardianship had control over my entire life as an adult. So there was no freedom for my life. There was no right to have a life, to live life. And that's just how I felt. And I do believe in sexism. There's different types of sexism. There's benevolent sexism. It's best thought of as a set of attitudes toward or beliefs about women that categorize them as fair, innocent, caring, pure, and fragile. Like when somebody says, that retarded ass hoe. Talking about a woman in a very bad manner, disrespectfully. A specific type of woman, a whore. That's so disrespectful to a woman and a person who doesn't have to go through that. Especially if they're being forced to go through that. That's not something that anybody wants for themselves. When it comes from misogynistic thoughts and processes. So, it talks about just how women are supposed to be the ones with the grateful heart. And they're supposed to be the ones that are always saying, I apologize, I did something wrong. Or, it's okay, she helped me out, he's a family man, he's supposed to help me take care of my kids. But women are, in a sexist perspective, are supposed to apologize. Why wasn't I taking care of the baby more than you were taking care of my babies? Because they are my kids. So, this goes back to single relationships where there's only one parent in the household. And, women are not anything like fair, innocent, caring, pure, and fragile. No woman has to feel sorry for a man or feel down towards somebody because they did everything to feel guilty that one little thing was such a bad thing they did, when really, why think about it so much? It's okay, move on. It's okay to have that bitch face mentality and that resting bitch face mentality of, I'm going to demand respect and I'm going to have my respect regardless of how you feel. It's okay for women to look angry. They don't always have to smile. They can look mad at times. They can look like, oh, I'm having a bad day today. Do I always have to smile? Do I always have to talk all the time? Do I always have to be this person that I'm not all the time for you? I can be this way as I want to for myself. I may be going through this hard time right now. That doesn't give me an excuse to do what it is was pleasing to you and be a people pleaser for you. What is hostile sexism? Hostile sexism is much more openly misogynistic than benevolent sexism. Because benevolent sexism is used as chivalry or traditional values. And they're often damaging and dangerous to women's rights and even their safety. And this is what I look into when it comes to my parents having guardianship, that sexism of benevolence to make me seem like I'm less because I'm a woman. And I find that to be very extremely wrong. Because that goes towards prostitution, that goes towards damaging effects on my life of what I could be doing that could be extreme because of the fact that they have this guardianship over me to make sure I'm not an adult and have rights as a woman. And that's really wrong. And so, hostile sexism often views gender equality as an attack on masculinity or traditional values and seeks to suppress movements such as feminism. Hostile sexism often represents a significant danger to women. Because when a man is raised to be sexist, he becomes sexist. And so he avoids a woman. He avoids who a woman is. And he automatically assumes that women are ungreat. They're not going to be anything important. And so he becomes sexist. At first, hostile and benevolent sexism seems to be incompatible. It may seem impossible for individuals to simultaneously believe that women are both pure and fragile and also manipulative and angry. That's called ambivalent sexism. However, ambivalent sexism may be understood in light of sexism more broadly. Particularly within Western society, sexism is largely based on traditional gender norms which place men in positions of authority in the home, the community, and government. So sexism is like a form of racism, and it's not racism, but it's sexism. It's like a gender issue rather than a color issue. Sexism is based on women's rights, though if you've noticed in feminism, they talk about women's rights mostly, and sexism is always towards the woman, and who has kids, who procreates, the woman. But the man is clearly involved with the woman if he is getting her pregnant, and he is the man. And I remember this comment somebody said to me a long time ago at the mall, this weird guy that was working at some skincare booth or whatever at the mall, and he said to me one time, "Oh, pretty girl, do you have a boyfriend every week?" And I was like, thank you, no. And made me kind of uncomfortable, obviously, because he's a person who's working for a store. But it reminded me now, to this day, of what my life has been, what my life's going to be like. And I feel like, honestly, from my point of view, what's going on with me is I might actually have a boyfriend every week. I mean, I'm not lying. It's kind of hard to believe this after what I said, but to embrace my issues and embrace that I don't have those issues anymore. It's like I've been thinking about things, and it's like I might as well just say that I just wish that guardianship would be erased and I would have my own guardianship as an adult, and that would ultimately save my life. And I don't want to be in any predicaments, to seem like I'm in a predicament. But after all that I've been through 100% of the time, yes, that guardianship is nonsense. Because I can't even have choices at this point in time. I have to work with resources, but what resources do I have that much of? I don't really have too many resources to help me out. I can try to be better off, but it really starts with money to help my life situation get better. I cannot financially take care of my life's values without some type of financial support, some type of help from someone, something to help me get into a better place in life. And this is just blocking off my abilities from age 20 till now, even childhood, even the way that I look at certain things that I look at life in any perspective when I never was raised correctly as a child. And so when I'm an adult, I need to look at adulthood the correct way. Like an adult looks at adulthood. Not like how a child looks at their life, but like an adult looks at their life. Because there's different stages in your life. It's not just a little stage here and there, and then you're a child the rest of your life. It's not like Peter Pan who lives in La La Land, It's much, much different being an adult than it was for you in your childhood. Everybody knows that. It's unexplanatory. It's hard to believe that somebody would be like, well, you can't live your life like an adult at age 20. And the basic skills people need to know to be a functional adult and not get hurt and for their safety is criminal. If I don't even have a car driver's license, I might as well just say, she's just dead, or she's just gone, or and I'm not any of those things. Neither in the future am I any of those things, but when it comes to them putting me through dangerous situations, it's not really me. It's just the way they handle me to be in dangerous situations. And it sets me up for failure in dangerous situations. It just does. It sets me up for a lot of hardships that I don't need. When I think about how things will be in the next year, I just look at myself and I'm like, gosh, life is never changing for me, it seems like. It just feels that way. It seems like life isn't changing for me for the better to make me into that proper 30-year-old I should be. And yeah, but just that topic that we're talking about has to do with labor trafficking, human trafficking, and sexual slavery. It's very difficult to talk about. These events actually happened in real life, in history, human history. These have happened to people. Even Australian history. Even Scotch-Irish culture. Blacks and Scottish-Irish accents. History of all of our ancestors. This has happened to everybody in our ancestry. And it makes up all of our histories. All of our histories. And every person is unique and different. And that's why I like individualism. I like individualism because it talks about the uniqueness of a person. How individuals are individual to one another. We're not just a race. We're not just a a slave trade. We're not just a woman or a man. We are, our identity is ourself, and that's who we are. And you can't just let someone be sexist or racist because somebody doesn't agree with us or they don't agree with the way they were raised. It's how we were raised, but it doesn't mean that we have to be this person that was raised a certain way to be this life that we don't want. And that's something for me to really think about. I'm not really wanting a life like that someone defines for me. I want a life for myself, and that is how it's going to be. I want a life that I create for myself, one that I choose for myself, that I am my own role model. And it comes down to the people making the decisions on their own independently to do something different, to make up something new, to have this artwork of trying to eat cotton leaves or, cotton was what was like a birth control method for these slave women, and they actually helped in history the slave woman and the slave children and the slave men. They helped everybody. Because no child deserves not to have a life of their own. And that's the end of my discussion for you guys. I hope you guys take care and have a wonderful day. And sorry about the bloopers on the front start of the podcast. I hope you guys liked my podcast. You guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.